Notification popped up while I was elbow deep in soapy dishwater at my mom's kitchen sink. Not a call, not even a text first. Just the push notification from the company HR portal, the kind that usually reminds you to complete your benefits enrollment or acknowledge a policy update. Except this one said, "Your employment status has been updated. Please log in for details." It was the Thursday before Labor Day weekend. I'd taken the whole week off, first real vacation in 3 years, driving down to visit my mom in Savannah after she had her hip replaced. I'd been here 4 days already, making her soup, watching old game shows, and finally sleeping past 6 in the morning for the first time since I couldn't remember. My phone had been in my purse more than in my hand. That felt like progress. I dried off my hands slowly, stood there a second with the dish towel pressed against my palms. Then I logged in. "Your position, Senior Integration Architect, Level IV, has been eliminated effective immediately as part of a company-wide restructuring initiative. Your severance agreement has been adjusted accordingly. A member of HR will be in touch within 5 business days." Adjusted accordingly. I read it 3 times. Then I sat down at my mom's kitchen table, the same one where I'd done my homework in 3rd grade, the same one with the burn mark from a casserole dish she forgot to put a trivet under in 1997, and I just stared at the pepper shaker. My mother shuffled in from the hallway on her walker. She looked at my face and immediately said, "Who died?" "Nobody yet," I told her. "I wasn't fired because I was bad at my job. Let me be clear about that." In 11 years at Colville Briggs Technologies, I had led 4 major platform migrations, 2 of which saved the company a combined total of over $8 million in vendor costs. I had trained 43 engineers, including 2 who were now directors. I had answered Slack messages from a hospital waiting room when my dad had his stroke. I had taken exactly 1 sick day in 2021 and spent half of it on a video call. What I was expensive. And in a company that had just been acquired by a private equity firm out of Chicago, expensive was the new problem. The acquisition had closed 6 months earlier. The new ownership was polite in that way. Private equity is always polite. Lots of synergy language, lots of town halls with slides about people-first transformation, lots of assurances that this was about growth, not cuts. I had been around long enough to know that when a firm pays $400 million for a mid-sized tech company, growth is not the first thing on their mind. Margins are. Headcount costs money. My headcount cost a lot of money. So when they came to me in March, my new skip level, a man named Rutherford, who wore fleece vests indoors and had never shipped actual software in his life, I listened carefully. They wanted me to take over the Helix platform, rebuild. Helix was the company's original product, 6 years old, architecturally embarrassing, held together with patches and prayers. It had been informally sunsetting for 2 years. Every senior engineer with options had quietly backed away from it. Taking it on meant inheriting all the technical debt, all the legacy team drama, and a project timeline that was aspirational in the kindest interpretation. Rutherford leaned across his standing desk and said, "You're the only one who can do this. We need someone who understands the full stack and the business context," which meant everyone else said no. I said yes, but not the way he expected. "I'll do it," I told him, "but I need a contract amendment." He blinked. "People didn't usually do that." "I'm not asking for more salary," I said, because I knew that's what he was already calculating in his head. "I just need the terms of my engagement clarified in writing, given the scope change." He said, "Sure, fine, of course. Legal would handle it." He had a 1 o'clock. What I drafted wasn't complicated. I had a friend from law school, a woman named Cecily, who did employment litigation in Atlanta, and I'd called her the night before. She walked me through the language carefully. She told me what would hold and what wouldn't, what clauses courts had upheld in Georgia versus what would get tossed. I wasn't writing a novel. I was writing a lock. The amendment was 4 pages. Most of it was standard scope language that any lawyer would skim through without concern. But nested in Section 9, between a paragraph about project deliverable timelines and one about IP attribution, was a clause. Section 9, Clause F. Any termination of employment or material alteration of role classification occurring during an active employer-approved leave of absence, including but not limited to PTO, medical leave, or FMLA, when no documented performance remediation process has been initiated and completed prior to such action, shall constitute a breach of protected employment status. In the event of such breach, the company shall be liable for full severance restoration at the enhanced rate outlined in Exhibit B, payment of all vested equity as of the date of breach, and a fixed contractual penalty of $300,000 payable within 10 business days of the triggering event. Not $2.5 million. I wasn't building a fantasy, I was building something real. $10,000 was a number Cecily and I had landed on, specifically because it was large enough to be a serious deterrent, but not so eye-catching that it would get flagged during a casual contract review. It was under the threshold that would trigger Caldwell Briggs's formal legal sign-off protocol. It was designed to be overlooked. Their in-house paralegal, a guy who had been doing nothing but acquisition integration paperwork for 4 months, read the amendment on a Friday afternoon before a long weekend. He initialed it. Rutherford signed it. My direct HR contact at the time, a well-meaning woman who had been moved to a different department 2 months earlier, countersigned the exhibit. Nobody called Cecily. And so I had this piece of paper, sitting in 3 backup locations. My personal Google Drive, my sister's email, and a USB drive in the drawer of my childhood nightstand, which was exactly where I put it back after verifying it one last time the morning I drove to Savannah. I was not paranoid. I just knew what kind of company I was working for. Back at the kitchen table, while my mother made tea, she didn't really want just to give herself something to do. I forwarded the HR notification and the full signed amendment to Cecily. Subject line, the thing we hoped wouldn't happen. She replied in 11 minutes. Found it. It triggered. Give me 24 hours. I put the phone face down. My mother set a mug in front of me. Outside, the neighbor's kid was riding a bike in slow loops around the cul-de-sac, the way kids do when they don't have anywhere to be. I understood that feeling now. Here's what I didn't know was happening on the other side while I sat in Savannah watching the late summer light move across my mother's linoleum floor. In the Chicago office of Meridian Capital Partners, the PE firm that now effectively owned what was left of Caldwell Briggs, a junior portfolio analyst named someone I'll never know the name of was running a spreadsheet audit of the newly restructured tech org. He was putting compensation data against deliverable output, the standard private equity version of deciding which people are worth keeping and which are overhead. My salary, my title, my tenure, my role on Helix, all of it ran through his model and came out on the wrong side of the math. He sent a memo to the operating partner overseeing Caldwell Briggs, a man I will call my new ownership's operator because I still don't entirely know his name. The memo said, Integration Architect, Level IV, Redundant Post-Migration, Recommend Elimination Q3. The operating partner forwarded it to Rutherford with a 1-line note. Agreed. Process accordingly. Rutherford forwarded it to HR. HR sent me a push notification. No call, no conversation, no call, no conversation, no documentation of any performance issue because there wasn't one. No formal remediation process because they didn't think they needed one. I was just a line on a spreadsheet being deleted. What they did not know was that deleting that line had a consequence attached to it, one that nobody in the chain had read. 2 days after I forwarded the amendment to Cecily, she called me while I was on my mom's back porch watching a thunderstorm come in over the marsh. They haven't responded, she said, which means their legal team either hasn't found the clause yet, or they're hoping you haven't either. A pause. I've been doing this 15 years, it's usually the first one. What do we do? I asked. We give them a deadline, politely. She sent a formal notice that afternoon, not a lawsuit, not a threat, just a letter. Clean, precise, the kind of document that says we know what we're doing without saying anything else. It cited the amendment, Section 9, Clause F, and the triggering conditions. It requested acknowledgement within 5 business days and a payment plan proposal within 10. I didn't post anything. I didn't tell my co-workers. I didn't call anyone who still worked at Caldwell Briggs, except one person. a woman on the Helix team I'd hired 2 years earlier who kept me quietly informed about what was happening inside. She didn't know about the clause. She just cared about doing the right thing. She told me what happened in the Monday morning leadership sync. Rutherford apparently opened the meeting with a quick mention that there had been some contractor-level paperwork concern flagged by an outside party. The head of legal, a man who had been stretched thin across 3 simultaneous acquisition integrations, said he'd look into it. Rutherford moved on to the product roadmap. Nobody called it urgent. But Cecily's letter had landed, and the clock on our clause was running. Here's something private equity firms understand very well. Liability events, not because they're ethical, they're not particularly, but because liability events show up in portfolio valuations and affect their own investor relationships. When a $310,000 contractual breach gets discovered during a routine compliance pass, the conversation changes register very fast. The compliance pass happened on a Wednesday. A third-party auditor brought in to review employment documents as part of a cleanup before Caldwell Briggs' first post-acquisition earnings call, found the notice from Cecily attached to my file, found the amendment, read Section 9 Clause F, and walked directly into the operating partner's office. I know this because my former co-worker, the one I'd hired, was walking past the glass conference room at the moment. The operating partner and 2 of Meridian's people were inside with a printed copy of the amendment spread across the table. She said the operating partner was very still in the way that people go still when they're calculating damage, not thinking about what to do next, but figuring out how bad it already is. He picked up the phone. The call he made was not to Rutherford. The earnings call was a week out. Meridian's institutional investors, pension funds, a university endowment, 2 family offices had been sent a pre-read deck the day before. The deck included a section on workforce optimization that cited headcount reductions, including mine, as a demonstration of post-acquisition efficiency gains. My elimination had been packaged as a selling point. Now it was a liability item. The meeting I'm told about happened the next afternoon. Conference room on the 14th floor, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the view of Lake Michigan that nobody ever actually looked at because they were always staring at slides. Meridian's operating partner, the general counsel, Rutherford, the head of Caldwell Briggs Legal, and a woman from Meridian's risk committee who flew in from New York and who, by all accounts, was the most frightening person in the room. She opened her copy of the amendment to Section 9 and asked Rutherford one question. Did you read this before you signed it? Rutherford said something about the review process and how legal had cleared it. She looked at the head of legal. He explained that the amendment had been reviewed at the paralegal level prior to full legal integration. She put the paper down, said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "We eliminated a protected employee during approved PTO without a documented remediation process, and we listed the resulting headcount savings in a pre-read deck that's currently in the inboxes of our LPs." The room was quiet. "This isn't just a contract breach," she continued. "This is a disclosure problem." Rutherford, to his credit or discredit depending on how you look at it, tried to reframe it. He said the termination had been in process before the leave began. That intent had been established, that the clause might not hold under Georgia employment law. Cecily had anticipated exactly that argument. Her letter addressed it in paragraph 4. The triggering condition in Section 9 Clause F is defined by the execution of the termination notice, not the initiation of internal discussion. The termination notice was delivered via HR portal on August 28th, while the employee was on employer-approved PTO that had been calendared and approved since June. Documented performance remediation was neither initiated nor completed. All trigger conditions are satisfied as written and signed. The woman from Risk read that paragraph aloud. Slowly. When she finished, she asked the general counsel directly, "Is this enforceable?" He said, "Yes." Rutherford put his pen down. There's a particular kind of silence that happens when a room full of people who are used to being the ones with leverage realize they're not. I wasn't there for it. I was in Savannah, sitting on the floor of my mom's living room, helping her do a jigsaw puzzle of the Charleston Harbor while a true crime podcast played in the background. But my former co-worker, was walking past the conference room on her way to the coffee station when the meeting broke up. She said Rutherford came out first. Said he looked like a man who had just sat through his own performance review and found out it was also a sentencing. Cecily called me while I was still on the floor with the puzzle pieces. They responded, she said, and they're not contesting the clause. They want to negotiate the payment timeline. I set down a piece of the harbor's stone wall. What did you say? I said the timeline is in the contract. 10 business days. If they'd like to discuss it, they're welcome to file a motion and we'll see them in Fulton County Superior Court during their earnings week. There was a pause on my end. Cecily. That's my job, she said. Payment came through in 9 business days, full amount. Severance restoration, vested equity, and the Clause S penalty. It hit my account on a Friday morning when I was in the middle of helping my mom with her physical therapy exercises in the living room. The alert came through and I just set my phone back down on the end table and helped her finish her reps. She didn't know about the money. I hadn't told her about any of it. The clause, the notice, the meeting in Chicago. She knew I'd been let go and that I was handling it. That was enough for her. Later that evening we sat on the porch and she asked me if I was going to be okay. I told her I was already okay. She looked at me the way mothers look at you when they know you're telling the truth, but they also know you're not telling all of it. You're not angry? She asked. I thought about that for a minute. The truth was that I had been angry once. Right after the Helix project began, when I realized the scope was even worse than I'd been told, when I understood that they had come to me not because they believed in me, but because they had run out of people willing to take the risk. That anger was useful. That was when I called Cecily. By the time they sent the portal notification, I wasn't angry anymore. That's the thing nobody tells you about doing something smart in advance. You don't feel vindicated in the moment because you already did the hard part months ago. The moment itself is almost quiet. I told my mum. Earlier. She nodded and looked out at the yard. The fireflies were starting to come out. Your father used to say, she said mostly to herself, that the best time to build a roof is before it rains. He did say that. He said it about car maintenance and gutters and getting your will notarized. He was not a dramatic man. He would have been satisfied that I had a signed contract and a lawyer on retainer and that I did not make a scene. I didn't make a scene. Caldwell Briggs published their earnings report 2 weeks later. The workforce optimization section was quietly revised. My elimination was no longer cited as an efficiency gain. Instead, there was a line about integration-related severance obligations under one-time costs. I found out through Cecily, who found out through the public filing. She sent me a screenshot with one line below it. You're the footnote that cost them a line-item revision. I printed it out. I'm not sure why. I don't usually print things. But I put it in a folder in my desk drawer next to the original amendment, and sometimes when I have a bad day at the new job, and there are bad days, there always are, I open the drawer and look at it for about 4 seconds and then close it again. That's usually enough. The Helix platform, by the way, shipped 8 months late and is apparently still causing problems. I know this because 2 of the engineers I trained, people who stayed, people who are still there grinding through it, text me occasionally with updates that sound like distress signals. I do my best to help when I can. I'm not petty about it. Those aren't my problems anymore, but they're still people I care about. The last thing I'll say is this. I didn't write that clause because I was planning to get fired. I wrote it because I understood something, after 11 years, about the kind of people who run those rooms. They're not villains, not most of them. They're just people who have been rewarded over and over for moving fast and not reading carefully, who have never had a real consequence catch up to them because nobody was prepared when they got to them. I was prepared. That's it. That's the whole thing. I was just ready. Smash that subscribe button if you've ever been the person in the room they forgot to read. I've thought a lot about what the real turning point was, not the notification, not the payment hitting my account on that Friday morning. It was the phone call I made to Cecily in March, the night before I walked into Rutherford's office and said yes with conditions. That was it. That was the moment everything changed. And I almost didn't make it. I almost just said yes, the normal way, the accommodating way, The way I had said yes for 11 years. That's the thing nobody tells you about. The kind of work ethic I had. It looks like strength from the outside. Answering emails from a hospital waiting room, skipping vacations, making yourself indispensable. But a lot of it wasn't strength. It was fear dressed up as dedication. Fear that if I slowed down, they'd find out I was replaceable. Fear that asking for anything, a boundary, a guarantee, a piece of paper that said this is what I'm owed, would make me look difficult. So I kept giving, and they kept taking, and I called it a career. What I had to learn. The hard way, the 11-year way, is that being good at your job is not the same as being protected. The people in that Chicago conference room didn't eliminate my role because I was bad at my job. They did it because they could, because nothing in writing said they couldn't. Because I had spent over a decade being the kind of employee who never made anyone uncomfortable by asking for guarantees in writing. Until once, just once, I did. I'm not going to pretend the clause was some act of grand moral courage. I was tired and I was angry, and Cecily talked me through the language on a Tuesday night while I ate leftover pasta at my kitchen counter. It wasn't poetic, but it was smart. And being smart, actually, deliberately, specifically smart about protecting yourself, that is something I wish someone had told me was allowed when I was 24 years old and just grateful to have a good job. Here's what I know now. The actions we take before the crisis determine whether we survive it with anything left. Not the actions we take in the moment of the crisis, when we're emotional and exhausted and the other side has a team of lawyers. The preparation, the forethought, the willingness to think clearly about what could go wrong and do something about it before it does. That's not pessimism, that's just being awake. Rutherford signed that amendment without reading it, not because he was stupid, he wasn't, but because he had never been made to face a real consequence for not reading. Nobody had ever held him to the fine print before, and so he stopped looking for it. I had learned to look, because I had stopped assuming that good faith was mutual just because I offered it first. My mom asked me if I was angry. I told her I used to be. That was true, but the anger had done its job. It had made me call Cecily in March instead of just swallowing the unfairness and going back to work. After that, I didn't need it anymore. I had already turned it into something useful. If you take anything from this story, let it be that. Your anger at being mistreated is information. It is telling you something is wrong and that you deserve better. The question is what you do with it. You can let it sit in your chest and burn you from the inside, or you can pick up the phone and call someone who knows employment law. I called Cecily. That's the whole story.